Hey guys, welcome back to the show. We have a great episode for you today. We are talking about red light again, but this time we're talking about the relationship between the gut microbiome and the brain and how applying red light to both might actually have some really, really deep benefits. So thanking you guys for being here, reminding you that natnitum.com is the place where you get all the information about all the things that are going on in my world, and also about how you can join my private membership community on Mighty Networks. And we can hook up live in Q&As that, as a matter of fact, I'm going to be doing one in just 40 minutes with the membership, live Q&As, N of 1 experiments using amazing products we feature on the podcast. Lots of fun stuff in there. So I encourage you to check that out. All right, let's talk a bit about this episode. Have you ever wondered how the natural power of sunlight could be harnessed to boost our health? In this episode of the Biohacking Superhuman Performance Podcast, I chat with Sarah Turner about red light therapy. Now, together, we unpack the science that underlines the interaction of red light with our bodies. We discuss numerous benefits it may offer for various health conditions and the crucial aspect of tailoring that dosage for optimal results. Sarah also goes into the gut-brain connection and how red light therapy may be beneficial for our microbiome. She also discusses the concept of structured water and its influence on our health, and she explains how light can alter the structure of water and consequently impact our bodies. Now, to top it all off, we will share some fascinating case studies and discuss an innovative device that she's designed for brain health that overcomes the barrier presented by the skull. Now, Sarah is a pro in this area. She's obtained degrees in psychological sciences and nutritional medicine with a postgraduate qualification in clinical neuroscience. She studied many techniques, both orthodox and alternative, with one goal in mind: to improve and optimize brain wellness and prevent brain-related disease. While in California, Sarah became involved with the biohacker movement, which led her to her current understanding of the overriding role of physics in biology and fueled her fascination with light and its healing effect on the body and mind. Now, to learn more about Sarah and her work, just go to sarahthrive.com. And if her work speaks to you, she has offered the listeners of this podcast an amazing discount on this cutting-edge technology that is just hitting the market as we speak. All you have to do is go to sarahthrive.com, and Sarah is C-E-R-A thrive.com, and enter NAT10 at checkout. All right, now let's jump into the episode. Hey folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Welcome back to the show, everybody. I am so thrilled to have my good friend and brilliant researcher, scientist person, Sarah Turner, here today with us. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you, Nat. Lovely to be here, of course.
Yes. Well, we've been planning this for a long time. I think we've planned and moved and canceled a couple of podcasts. I think the last time was me, something about my move or something. Anyway, but we are here to dive into red light and all about red light the brain, red light in the gut, the connection between the gut and the brain, how red light might help people to achieve really interesting results by tapping into this. So, but before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about red light. Like, I've always thought of you as Sarah, the red light person, like you're the expert in this zone of red light. So give us a little bit of foundation in the top subject so we can continue on in an orderly fashion.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I have focused now quite a few years looking at red light therapy. And of course, red light therapy is very interesting because it's actually utilizing natural wavelengths that we get in the sun anyway. Mm-hmm. And that's really what drew me to kind of really focus my time looking at red light therapy, because there are lots of ways you can kind of modulate the brain. There are lots of neurotech. There's lots of different kinds of therapies, but this one specifically is using wavelengths that we already find in nature. Mm-hmm. We're just kind of harnessing those wavelengths and then giving it to the body in a specific format, depending on what we're trying to do. And you've probably had people talking about red light therapy before, but yeah, just to go over some of the basics.
Yeah.
of course, in order for anything to have an effect in the body has to take in the information and translate that information into something useful. So red light is actually taken by light receptors in our body. And it's probably no surprise, bearing in mind we're really diurnal mammals that have evolved outside, that our whole body is covered in light receptors of various kinds. And different wavelengths of light actually, or different colors, as people might talk about wavelengths, actually have different physiological effects in the body, depending on which light receiver they're actually taken in by.
Right.
So specifically, we're talking about red light therapy, and red light therapy encompasses red light from about 600 nanometers up to near infrared too, up to 1,200 nanometers. So people tend to sort of bracket that whole thing as red light, but we're actually talking about quite a broad spectrum of light from red to near infrared. Mm-hmm. And the primary way that is received in the body is by a particular enzyme in the mitochondria. So that's probably, textbook. That is how light is received in the body. The light penetrates into the body. It activates the mitochondria in a very specific part of the respiratory chain, or sometimes it's called the electron transport chain. And that has various knock-on effects, most notably the production of ATP, which is the energy molecule in the body.
Right.
Perfect. So really that's one of the main ways that red light exerts its effect, is by giving the body a lot more energy. And of course, if you have a lot more energy for work, the body can do a lot with that. Mm-hmm. Also, it causes things like a release of nitric oxide. We get increased blood flow. Again, this is something that's fundamental to healing, is that you have good blood coming in, good oxygenated blood, and removal of waste products. So they're probably, from a very, very simplistic point of view, because red light does a huge plethora of things, way beyond just energy and blood flow. But that's a good place to start. That's probably the main benefit of red light therapy on the body.
Right. And so you mentioned that there's a huge range of wavelengths that we talk mm-hmm. about in red light, anywhere from 600 to 1200. Once we get to 1200, the naked eye doesn't actually see that light anymore, right? That's the near infrared. Actually, we can't really see the light past about 700.
Right.
Right.
So, but once we start getting to those really long wave, because when we're talking about 700, 1200, it all sounds like numbers, but what we're actually talking about is the length of the wave.
Okay.
So red is a shorter wavelength than the near infrared, because we're kind of going up in wavelengths. And so as a rule of thumb, the longer the wavelength, the more it penetrates into the body, although there are some caveats to that, because the light becomes absorbed and scattered in various ways, depending on the tissues that it hits on the way. But as we start to go further and further into the red, and we get to far infrared, the body perceives that more as heat. And things like saunas, people are asking, okay, what's the difference between red light therapy device and a red light therapy sauna? Well, the saunas tend to be very long wavelengths, like 3,000 nanometers.
So they heat you from the inside, kind of.
Yeah, so then you're getting it's a different effect. You're getting a heat effect as opposed to a photonic effect, and there are different mechanisms at play. So this therapy that we're talking about, usually the devices end at 1,200 nanometers wavelength, and in fact most a little bit before that. So most of the devices that you'll see on the market, they're targeting this enzyme in the mitochondria. So they're looking at the absorption peaks of that enzyme. So you have 630, you have 650, you have 810, you have 850. A little bit longer, you have 1070. So this is all within that fairly tight range of visible red and near infrared light.
Right. And so all of those affect the mitochondria, it's the cytochrome C. Is that the enzyme we're talking about, or is it?
Yeah, that's the main enzyme that people look at, cytochrome C oxidase. It actually also has been shown to trigger the second enzyme in the respiratory chain. Red light also is taken up by heme in the blood. And in fact, there's a lot of compounds in the body that have an aromatic ring, which is something that will respond to light in some way. So we're being very simplistic when we say, the red light is taken up by cytochrome C oxidase, and this leads to ATP. That does happen, and that's probably one of the main mechanisms, but it's not the only one by far, but certainly that's where most people kind of putting their attention for the main mechanism of these red light therapy devices in particular.
Okay. And so you were saying that the length of the wavelength determines how deep the light will penetrate into the tissues. That's right? Did I get that right?
Yes, that's right.
So that means that the shorter wavelengths, like closer to the 600 end of the spectrum, those are going to be more shallow in effect. Basically, that's going to be more of a surface effect, or maybe a few layers into the dermis, let's say.
Yeah, so those so red light, the visible red light that you can see is fairly superficial. Mm-hmm. It won't penetrate deep into the body, and that's why a lot of the face masks and things that you see as an anti-wrinkle treatment, they use the red light because it's going to penetrate into the skin, but not much further. But that's what you need for that kind of effect. Right. Helps with collagen, it helps with fibrogen, it does a lot of really cool things. But if you want to get deeper into the body, you do need a longer wavelength of light.
Interesting. And so, not necessarily on our list of topics, but what happens? So one of the conversations also is around laser, like the type of bulb that's used to deliver the light, right? So some of them, the LED, I think, is more of a fan, let's say, emerging. So it's going to dissipate more, whereas a laser is going to be more focused and might go more deep. Did I get that right? Like, will a laser, does it depend also on the type of bulb that you're using to deliver that light to?
Well, the difference mainly between laser light and light that's delivered from an LED is actually whether or not the light is in phase, which basically means are all of the photons on the same path?
Okay.
And in laser light, they are. In laser light, you have all of the wavelengths are matched up. So you have a coherent light. So you're having unidirectional lights all going in the same way. LED doesn't have that. LED has kind of light could be coming out all over the place. You can have LEDs built in various different ways. Some of them kind of have a wider aperture. Some of them you can actually focus in, and there is kind of a mix between the two. There's now laser LEDs as well as lasers and LEDs. So I think the main thing to think about when you're comparing laser and LED is coherence or not of the light.
Okay.
And of course, people come from their own place of what they favor, because with laser, you can target a very specific spot, very, very narrow spot, because we're talking about light going in one direction, whereas you can't do that so much with LED. However, you are getting interference patterns from all of the lights that are kind of incoherent and kind of traveling into the body. So there's pros and cons. So with the laser, you can target a specific spot, but potentially you're getting a very limited range. With LED, you're getting, they call it speckle, but it's really just these interference patterns of the light.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because you can be very, very targeted with laser, there is also a safety issue with your eyes, because it can burn, because you are focusing a very direct beam at a very small spot, which means, for the power ratio, you're getting a lot of power in one spot. Think about using.
Yeah. So it could be for good or for not so good.
Yeah, just think of the magnifying glass on the grass. You can focus light into a spot, and then all of a sudden you can burn something. So I think that's another one of the differences when people use laser and people use LED. People who use laser have to do it in a very safe setting. It has to be a clinical setting. It's not something you kind of want to do at home. LEDs makes these light therapy devices much more accessible, because you take away that concern.
Right. Okay. Well, that makes sense. Okay. So wavelength is one very important parameter. So understanding what wavelength any kind of device is delivering is going to affect what it's able to accomplish. And then the other metric that we mention often is output. So that's kind of like, is that basically the power behind the delivery mechanism?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. And so what should people know about that? Like, what questions should people be asking about their devices when it comes to output?
Well, output, this is one of those things where there just isn't a consensus right now.
Interesting. Okay.
It's very, very interesting because really this is the medicine, and yet people focus more on the bottle a lot of the time. What does the device look like and where does it go? And when actually you really want to think about the photons that are getting into your body.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different things to consider. It's, of course, the dose or the power output is very important because you need to have enough photons getting to wherever you want them to go to have an effect. You also don't want to overdo it. You don't want to have too many photons going there because then you negate the effect. So normally when people talk about light, they talk about a biphasic response. And that's just kind of posh words for saying, okay, a little won't do. Too much is, you can have too much. You need to get a sweet spot.
Right.
Most of the devices, if they're coming from people that are reputable companies and you're not just buying like a car backlight off Amazon or something, if you're buying a device that's meant for a health and wellness function, people have worked out, okay, this is a good dose for a certain time.
Right.
So people measure it in different ways and people express it in different ways. Sometimes people talk about the number of LEDs. Some people just talk about the output. I think the most useful metric is to look at joules per centimeter squared, because that takes into account the energy, but also time in effect.
Right. So that might determine whether you need to use your device for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 5 minutes. Well,
that takes into account time. Joules per centimeter squared takes into account the treatment time.
Right.
So something like let's say we're going to talk about red light therapy for the brain.
Okay.
And the research indicates that you need somewhere between 3 and 50 joules per centimeter squared in order to have a therapeutic dose. Now, that's the amount of energy that we're putting out. What goes in is another story, because we don't really know when we're using these devices, what's going actually into the brain. People are different, so people have different skin tones, people have different water composition in their skin, different ages, different thicknesses of bone, different amounts of adipose tissue. So we are really at a phase, I think, in red light therapy where people are starting to learn a lot more about dose and how to tailor it to a specific person, a specific condition. It really depends what you're trying to do. And also, you need to consider, light will only go in a straight line. So if you've got a panel and you're kind of standing in front of it, a lot of that is the light is going to be reflected. It's going to bounce off. It's going to do different things. You're going to get a different amount of light into if you're standing in something that contours to your body. So for the same output, one could be 30 joules per centimeter squared, so could the other. But the one that contours to the body, you're going to get a lot more of the dose actually into your body. So there is a lot to consider with the dosing question. And it's something, I'm really trying, it's not standardized at the moment.
At all. Yeah.
But it will be. And I think people are, the more research that comes out, the more people start to use the technologies, the more people will start to standardize and recognize, okay, this is how you deliver a X dose and it's going to have this effect. But it is, at the moment, like I say, it's something where you do have to do a bit of research and take into account how it's going to work for you and your specific condition.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it's a little bit all over the map. Okay, so let's talk. So, people use red light. The biggest conversation around red light typically is for skin, as you mentioned before, right? For aesthetics. After that, we have for injuries, right? People will use their red light devices hoping that it's going to help their injuries to resolve faster. And I've definitely seen this happen over and over again. There's some reasonably good research around it. So that's a big check mark over there. Because we're activating mitochondria and basically giving them more energy, there's even applications of the red light, even for hair, right? For hair growth to support, right? Like on the aesthetics front. But then we get into this world, and the first I ever heard of red light for the brain was back when I was in school studying nutrition, and I wrote a paper on Parkinson's disease. And at the time, I came across this story of this man who had Parkinsonian symptoms, and he did many, many different things to basically do something, because his doctor said, well, there's nothing we can do. And he was like, yeah, it's not going to work for me. And one of the things he did is that he lined a bucket with red lights, and I don't think they were particularly sophisticated red lights. I don't know exactly too much about the red lights that he used. And he stuck this bucket on his head for, I don't know how long every day, and believed that, and it seemed to have helped him to the point where other people started doing the bucket thing. And so there's clearly, and I think there's quite a lot of research now around red light and the brain. And so maybe we could talk a little bit about moving from the red light bucket to the world where we are today.
And I love that story. I love that story. And actually, people should check it out because there's a whole little documentary about it on YouTube. It was actually in Tasmania.
Yes, and that's right. In Africa.
They ran out of buckets and they were using waste paper bins and they were using lampshades, all kinds of things because they were getting such good results. Mm-hmm. And it's since been taken and written up, in a more professional way. And people are now, yes, of course, trying to work out what that effect is and how can we maximize on that effect. And actually, Parkinson's is one of those brain disorders that does seem to really respond to this therapy, which is interesting, right? Because Parkinson's starts apparently deep in the brain. That those dopamine cells that are going are in the substantia nigra. That's not on the surface of the brain where potentially we can get light to. Mm-hmm. Something is going on where either the light is somehow being taken deep into the brain, or there is a systemic effect of the light, or there's a way that the body is just increasing in general wellness, and that's having an effect on these people.
Right. Well, I think part of that research also turned up some really interesting stuff around the microbiome and right, the effect. Like there was one researcher who'd figured out, like she'd gone through a bunch of different cases and had figured out that there was a connection with the olfactory nerve in the nose as well as in the gut microbiome, and it had to do with exposure to certain pesticides and the formation of these Lewy bodies, which she said seemed to travel up the nerve into the brain. And so this is going back, I don't know, over 10 years ago, and who knows what happened to that research and if it's been refuted or if there's something to it. But I think what I got out of it is A, red light on the head, super interesting. And B, that things like Parkinson's don't just start. It's not only a brain thing. Like there's other things going on in other parts of the body. So I definitely want us to talk about red light in the gut as well. But so with the brain, and there are certain companies that sell devices that are like, we haven't studied our device on the head, so don't put this thing on your head. Meanwhile, people are running around buying things to put on their head that delivers red light. So I don't know if you have like any more to share with us on this whole area of research around red light and its effect on the brain.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a field that's exploding right now because people are getting such great results. And actually, one of the ladies that was probably doing some of the studies you mentioned, Dr. Anne Lee, but she's running some trials over in Australia, in Sydney, and they are finding exactly this. They're doing red light specifically on the head, and they are monitoring people with Parkinson's, and they're also doing things like taking stool samples and seeing exactly what's going on. Mm-hmm. But it's not just Parkinson's. There are lots of people. There's Dr. Paolo Cosano in the States, and he's just opened up a research clinic. At the moment, he can't have people coming as patients. They have to be research subjects. But, there is enough data there to show. I think he's published on people with Down syndrome who have increased cognition as a result of red light therapy.
Really?
He also is looking at major depressive disorder and finding that he's able to have a positive effect on that condition. So there are people that are looking at red light therapy. There are lots of companies, as you said, that specifically make devices for the head, because there are a few things to take into consideration, which is slightly different. The head is slightly different. One, you've got to get through the cranium.
Right.
You have to
the skull. Sorry, yeah.
You have to get through the skull, so you can't just use so much of just a red light. Although, as with the bucket head people, they were using red light and they were seeing some effects. But I think majority of people are looking at near infrared because you can actually then get to the surface of the brain, and that seems to have an enhanced effect. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting to me, and why I particularly am interested in this systemic effect of red light therapy, where you kind of have an overall increase in wellness by just stimulating one part of the body, and it seems to raise the health of all parts, is that yes, you can just use red light and you can stimulate the blood. You can also use near infrared and get to the surface of the brain. Perhaps you can also use a gut panel and get to the microbiome. So you really are maximizing your chances of having a therapeutic effect on the brain by utilizing all these things, Let's stimulate the gut and let's see if we can get onto the surface of the brain.
Right.
But there's a ton of animal models of Alzheimer's, of Parkinson's, where they have very well demonstrated that there is an effect of red light. Now we're going into like clinicals with humans, and these effects are being duplicated, but obviously at a slower rate because these trials take a long time.
Sure. Yeah.
But certainly Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, post-traumatic stress, TBI, these are things which people are actively researching right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's such a fascinating area. And I just think that it was interesting what you said earlier is when we think about where Parkinson's in the brain, where the action is, it's this substantia nigra, which is deep, deep in the brain. And, there's a reasonable chance we're not actually getting there. But, I think it speaks to the power of chemical messaging and all of the ways that the body has to transfer information or a stimulus from one place to another place where it's needed. So, which I think
that is the fascinating bit, how is the body doing this? And of course, we're talking about light. It's a physical phenomenon. It's not chemical. Yeah. So we have to then get our minds out of kind of the biochemical pathways and start to think about biophysics, which is a totally different way of viewing biology. And if you start to think about the brain in terms of physics, then all kinds of avenues open up. And if you start to think about quantum physics, it's limitless, because actually, how is light actually influencing our tissues? There probably are quantum processes at play because light is quantum. And so people are now looking at all different ways that the brain could actually be processing light. I'm very interested in structured water because it's something that I was researching before I got into photobiomodulation. And we already know that when light shines onto a surface, a hydrophilic surface that's next to water, that we can change the structure of water. So the brain is mainly water, our bodies are mainly water. And so, of course, there is probably an effect that's going on there. We also know that our cells emit light as well as receive light. We emit light. We have biophotons, which is very, very low, weak emissions of light. Maybe these are being triggered. Maybe we're stimulating this different communication system that we haven't really looked at before because it's a little bit outside of our biochemical model of the brain that we have right now.
Right. Interesting.
And so that is very, very interesting when people, actually, I've been to a lot of events where it's academic people that have kind of been a long time in this biochemical world are starting to consider, okay, perhaps we do have these other effects. We recognize quantum effects in photosynthesis, for example. That's now becoming more established. Well, our body has like its own version of that in the mitochondria. So, of course, there's going to be some of these effects. And protons are in a certain way acting similar to an electron. So we can start to build up a different picture of the brain if we start to think about the brain in terms of physics instead of chemistry.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So do you want to talk about structured water a little bit? Because I find that topic super interesting. I've recorded one podcast with, I don't know if you've heard of the Analema wand, and they have a crystal wand that they filled with this water that's been structured. They call it mother water. And they talk about using the wand to stir your water and helps the water that you're going to use to get structured itself. And they have fascinating experiments that they've done on plants and animals, which they've got some human studies as well. But the plants and animals to me are in some ways more fascinating because they don't lie. There's no placebo effect, plant this little plant over here versus that little plant over there. Nobody know, this one's getting this kind of water, this one's getting that. And yet there seems to be a very real effect on how these plants are able to grow.
Mhm.
Do you want to talk a little bit about this? Because I don't know nearly as much about it as I would like to. And I'm always fascinated by the idea of structured water and the idea that water that we get from nature is naturally structured.
Yes.
But by the time it comes out of your tap, it's just been stripped of its ability to get organized, if you will.
Well, there was a lot of work about this kind of quantum coherent domains in water and things like that. That was Dr. May Wan Ho. Many years ago, I actually had the pleasure of going to her house and filming her a long time ago. But more recently, Dr. Jerry Pollack, of course, wrote the book Fourth Phase of Water, and he does a brilliant job of kind of bringing it down to lay terms, where he kind of does little drawings of batteries and talks a lot about charge, because really that's what we're talking about with structured water, because we're very familiar with the model of water, which is H2O. Yes. But actually there are lots of different other molecular structures that water can take, and they have different properties. So ice, for example, ice is structured water. It's water that's got a very specific structure, and it's a lattice structure with strong bonds in between. So it's hard, it's harder than water. But what happens if you shine light onto water is the protons, or these kind of the bonds in between the lattice, get pushed out into the bulk water. So then you have these lattice sheets form next to any kind of membrane or any kind of hydrophilic surface. Actually, Jerry Pollack wasn't interested in biology. He was a materials scientist. So he was just looking at Nafion tubes, anything that's got a charge. And so then you get this like gel-like water, which is different. It's no longer H2O because you've pushed some of those H's out, right? And then it forms different bonding. And this has a different charge because you've pushed out the hydrogens, which are positive. So you have negatively charged water next to the surface. Now, the reason why this is very interesting in biology is because the way that proteins fold is they are attracted to different charges on the surface.
Right.
So if you can optimize, the body knows what it wants. These proteins are all hydrated. All proteins in the body are hydrated, which means, that they're surrounded by water. You can actually change the charge on proteins. This could affect protein folding, which of course is interesting for the brain. You don't want protein misfolding anywhere, but specifically not in the brain. So, that's just one example. Anything in the body is related to charge, really. So the charge on different surfaces, it's how the body recognizes things. It's how the body operates. It's how you have nerve impulses and everything. So I think the main takeaway from structured water is, yes, when you have this charge in the water, it has a huge impact on all biology and all living systems, because living systems are operating based on relative charges to each other. So yes, plants, we're not so different to plants in our molecular structure, what's actually going on at that kind of fundamental level. So it's no surprise that we respond. And there are ways in nature that we charge water, even like vortexing, some people charge water by yeah, well, that's what water does when it comes down from streams and things naturally anyway. That's already charging it. And of course, most water that's outside is under sunlight. So you're getting vortexed charged water in any kind of a flowing waterway where people, get their water from. So you're right. If you have water that's kind of standing, it's lost that charge. You're not getting structured water. One issue I have is that the body will structure the water for you because your body is full of charged surfaces.
Right.
So, so I still don't really know how much of, if you're drinking structured water, how much of that structure remains once you've taken it into your body, because your body's going to do something with it. But potentially, you're better off drinking structured water than you are drinking tap water, for sure, for lots of reasons.
Oh, yeah. No, and I wonder if it's like the thinking around so many other things around the body is if we're providing the body with water that's already structured, it's one less bit of energy we have to expend to structure the water. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, but Yeah.
like it's, if you're delivering something to the body that's kind of already done, it's one less thing that energy has to be expended towards. And there's a benefit. Certainly in in a lot of the experiments that people have done, they've seemed to show a benefit, because I would think that plants as well have the ability to structure water to a point. Like when you're eating fruits or vegetables, isn't the water that you're getting from those all pretty much structured?
It's structured, yes. And then we could kind of go on, it's also deuterium depleted, which is another.
That was last week's show.
Yes, it's a whole nother topic. But just to bring it back to light, the way that you can structure the water in your body is to use red and infrared light.
Yes. Yes.
Because what you're doing potentially is you're covered in these hydrophilic surfaces. That's your membranes. You shine light onto the body, and the body is then utilizing that light energy to change the charge in the water, with all of the health implications that entails.
Perfect.
So, yes, you can drink structured water, but you can also use red and near infrared light. And you can actually structure water with light, of course, in bottles. I know a lot of people who have different color bottles and they line it up depending on what they're trying to do. But the reason why it's particularly interesting for me looking at the brain is because that could explain some of these effects that we don't quite yet understand as to why long wave light seems to have these amazing effects, and yet we're really only treating, the light's only getting to a few millimeters of the brain at most.
Right. But if it's helping to restructure the water in the brain, then that's going to have a systemic effect on the brain.
Yeah.
That's so fascinating, right? So it's like there's so many different angles to this. So moving to a different angle from the brain, the gut. And this is an area that you've studied it as well, like the effect of light on the gut, and which is ultimately about the microbiome. Like, we're not trying necessarily to affect the intestine. I mean, not that we wouldn't want a healthy colon and all that stuff, but really when we talk about red light, applying red light to the lower abdomen, we're very often hoping that we're bringing some kind of benefit to that colony of bugs that we have in our gut, that fundamentally is, you may think you're running the show, but I secretly think they're all running the show for us. So
yes, for sure. I've often wondered that we are more bacterial and yeast and everything else than we are human, which sometimes is pause for thought, who is running the show? You're right. Especially, all kinds of dysbiosis is now being linked to addictive personality disorder, to mood disorder, to depression, to neurodegeneration. The reason why I'm kind of interested in irradiating the gut with light is the strong connection between the gut and the brain. We have this kind of bidirectional communication, and also it's a good access point. If you want to maximize, getting a light therapy, the gut is a good way in. You can kind of lay it flat there. There's a lot of things going on under the surface. You're potentially targeting the vagus nerve. You're targeting the blood cells. You're even targeting the fat cells, where we know we make stem cells. So for me, the gut is a good target site to act in conjunction with a brain device, because we know we can kind of do different things with a brain device. We can modulate the signal, we can do pulsing, we can do all kinds of things, but we're probably only getting a small amount of light in. If you combine that with a gut device, you can irradiate a bigger area, you can potentially get a lot more mitochondria. And also we know now about this bidirectional communication between the brain and the gut.
Through the vagus nerve, right?
Through the vagus nerve, also through, like you say, through the microbiome. The microbiome are releasing compounds all the time. That's going via the vagus nerve, also via the blood. There's a lot going on because nothing in the body works in isolation.
Absolutely.
Everything is just connected, circles within circles. So you can't do something to one organ and not affect all the others. Everything is so interconnected. And the gut and the brain, the gut and the heart, we're finding all different axes now, but certainly the gut and the brain in particular. And we talk about the microbiome. I mean, the microbiome are very similar to mitochondria in their kind of physiology.
Interesting.
Actually, there's one of the major theories is that the mitochondria were once microbes that were then taken up by unicellular creatures in order to kind of have this trade-off of, one gets safety, one gets energy, and then we can start to grow. So it's no surprise then that the bacteria respond to light. the jury's out a little bit. Is that, are you actually irradiating the microbiome directly when you use a red light therapy device on the gut, or are you just making the environment more optimal so you get proliferation of the good ones? I think from all of the research I've seen, certainly on an animal model, it seems to be that you're affecting the microbiome directly. And, there's a lot of studies to show, on a mouse model that you can irradiate the gut and then you can see a different profile of bacteria.
Interesting.
Humans, there's sometimes, there can be a lot between your gut and actually the light surface, and people seem to still get a beneficial effect. I think probably the body wants to return to homeostasis. If you give the body energy, the body will do that. And when the body starts to return to that baseline, then the gut starts to work better, then you get the good bacteria coming in. So I think a lot of the time what you're doing with the light is just kind of shifting the body towards a better balance, better homeostasis, and then the body's doing the rest.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it's interesting that, you kind of alluded to like someone who's carrying a lot more adipose tissue or fat in their belly. The light's going to have to go a lot further to get to the microbiome, but we know that fat itself it's active. Like, it's not inert. It's producing inflammatory molecules. It's producing hormones. It's metabolically very active. And so I haven't particularly looked into this myself, but I'm sure that people are looking at red light on fat and what's the effect that's having on people's inflammation status. And I can only imagine that it's doing good.
Yeah. And people are doing, a little bit of fat certainly, is healthy to a certain extent because your stem cells come from there, Yeah. So there's all kinds of good stuff that happens when you shine light onto that. Obviously, if it gets to a point where it's not healthy, that there are some studies to show that red light therapy used over a certain period helps people to lose fat cells.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly there is a lot on the cosmetic side where people are doing that very successfully.
Yeah.
But certainly at least you're getting to all the blood vessels. And we now know that the mitochondria are not contained within cells. We have a lot of free floating mitochondria.
Right.
So you can stimulate the mitochondria, and those mitochondria will be drawn to the places where they're needed. Mm-hmm. So that's why I like kind of the idea of irradiating the gut, because you're just increasing the health of the body generally. Even if you're aiming for a better brain, if you've got a dodgy knee, the mitochondria are going to go there. The mitochondria are going to go where they're
needed. Yeah. Yeah. Well, even stem cells, right? Like, stem cells are attracted to areas of damage ultimately.
That's right.
So and it's interesting as I sit here, I think I'm trying to think, but I believe that the biggest and first purchase I made in the biohacking space, as it were, was a red light panel, like 10 or 12 years ago. And I remember I was obsessed with it, and I would stand in front of it for 10 minutes, front and back, every single night. And after a fairly short period of time, I stepped on a scale. I was like, oh my God, I've lost like 2 pounds. And I think at the time, it was a lot of inflammation, like just I'd lost, the inflammation had gone down. It was really quite remarkable. Okay. So let's make our way now to your, you've had this massive interest in the brain, in photobiomodulation, which is another term we use for applying light therapy, and this connection between the gut and the brain. And so you decided, okay, let's do something about this. So you've actually developed a device that actually addresses both of these areas simultaneously. So let's let the cute red elephant in the room and talk about Sarah Thrive a little bit.
Oh, yeah. So this is actually a project that came out of, I was actually involved in some data collection, actually for a Parkinson's trial, which was going on.
Okay.
And so, because my background is, I have a research background, mainly pharmaceuticals. And so I was doing some data collection, and actually the device was a big, heavy device, and it was quite difficult for people to use. And I thought, well, I can see that it's working. I mean, it was very obvious that it was working. And
so what were the benefits that people were seeing? Like what when you say it was working, like what were people experiencing?
So the trial was, it was actually 6 months, and I was on for 3 months, and we were looking at gait analysis. We were looking at response time. We were looking at drawing a clock, and there were certain blood biomarkers. Okay. But from my point of view, I was the person doing the data collection. So hello, Mrs. Jones, come in, sit down, please, we're going to do the hand tapping today. And of course, from the analysis, that has been proved to be statistically significant. However, from me speaking to these people, I've gone from people who are fairly disengaged to people who are interacting. And interestingly enough, it wasn't always in a good way. At the end of the study, some people were getting a bit peed off. All of a sudden, they're not getting as much attention. It's like, okay, bye. Oh, you're not going to put my cardigan on? Well, no, you can do that now yourself, because people were actually being able to change their behaviors. And for some people, that was a difficult thing. You've gone from being dependent to suddenly you have to do your own cardigan up, people, a bit indignant because you assume a personality. And I think as a coping strategy, people, maybe disengage because, it's hard to go through that. And,
surrender a bit to what's happening. I mean, you get different types of people, right? Different personalities.
Yes, different personalities. But generally in this group, that there was a little bit resistance to getting better because of the increased responsibility. And, even family members were saying, oh my, goodness, I actually had a row with her yesterday and, had nothing for like the last 2 years, and now she's kind of answering back. She doesn't want that for her dinner, and you're like, wow, that to me was the turning point. It's like, yeah, this is something very real that's happening here.
It's like a reawakening almost of that person.
Well, it was definitely an indicator to me that people were be able to see real results and that something was happening. And so that's really when I thought, okay, we need to have a small device that's easy for people. And I went to a few companies and was lucky enough to find a company in the Netherlands that have made this band, which is very easy, and it's battery operated, so there's no wires, so people, not kind of attached to a plug point. It's shielded. We've got the whole Bluetooth disable. And we're able to do lots of different things with that. We can play meditations. We can kind of oscillate the frequency to entrain brainwaves. And then another thing that I really wanted was to have a gut panel at the same time for all the reasons that we just spoke about. Because I think if you want to really try to kind of maximize your chances of having a result, it's good to get light to the brain, but let's try and just get light to the body generally in a more accessible way.
Yeah, well, it makes so much sense. And honestly, it's so easy. Once you're there.
Yeah, you just put it.
As you say, why not? Like I've had your device on when we were at the Health Optimization Summit. And right. There's a picture of me somewhere online. And to begin with, the red light on the belly feels amazing. So it's not like you're going to get any kind of resistance to that. It's actually like getting a bit of a...
It's just a very gentle heat. It's not hot.
Warmth. It's not even heat.
It's just a warm pad. It's very soft. You can just... I've got like a strap. I can show you actually. I'm just looking. I've got them all over
all over the place.
I've got stuff all over the place. But this is kind of the final design. It is very simple on purpose, because it's just on and off. We're kind of limiting any kind of exposure. I sometimes use it if I've got a bad back, I just tuck it down my yoga shorts or down the front. So that was really the remit, is to have something that was going to be easy for people enough that they do it. Because I think that is one of the caveats with red light, is you do have to do it. You have to do it on a regular basis and for an extended period. So I'll just show you the headband. You can see how kind of small and easy it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's actually super comfortable. It's very light.
It's very light. Yeah. And it's just 10 minutes a day, which will give the 30 joules per centimeter squared, which is kind of the dose that I'm working towards.
And what's the wavelength you ended up choosing for this? Going back to our discussion earlier?
Yeah. Well, again, as I mentioned, the longer
joules. Yeah.
The longer wavelengths get a bit deeper, but I also wanted to have red light to stimulate the blood around the head. And because also I love the bucket head people, and I thought, well, they're definitely onto something. So I do have that red wavelength, which is 630. But then in the near infrared, I have 850, 940, and 1070.
Oh,
And
so you have a whole mix in there. Yeah.
I have a whole mix, and I've very specifically done that to try and target as many chromophores as possible, because each of the wavelengths gets absorbed in a slightly different way. And actually, water becomes a major chromophore above 900 nanometers. So I'm trying to target the water as well as hit that cytochrome C oxidase, as well as hit all of the light receivers in the blood.
I love it.
So that's it. It's kind of like a...
Yeah, it's a shotgun approach. So you reproduce this both for the headband and for the gut panel.
So the gut panel is just 2 wavelengths because we don't need to penetrate the bone. It's easy access. We don't need those really long wavelengths. So the gut one is just the 630 and 850, and that one is recognized kind of for all of that gut stuff. That's the main wavelengths that have been used in a lot of the research.
Okay. So we've talked about the Parkinson's people. Obviously, there's that population. Definitely, there would be an application there for them to hopefully see some impact. Who are the other people? What are the other applications for it? Who are the other people that can use that, when the Air Thrive's available, which hopefully by the time this is out, people will be able to buy it.
I will just say that at the moment there is no FDA classification for a brain health application. So even the study that was done on Parkinson's, although that's published and people are starting to look to see if that can be submitted in an application, at the moment it's not. So all of these brain health applications are for research only.
Okay.
And that's not just my device, that's with all devices on the market. Nobody's got an application. People are looking to get them, and certainly it looks like maybe Alzheimer's, maybe first, or maybe autism. People are kind of really moving forward with clinical trials for autistic spectrum disorder. But at the moment, it's a wellness device, for all of these different devices. And the aim is to go from a baseline of where you're at to better. So better memory, better cognition, better sleep, better performance, better focus.
Right.
So and it's a wellness device. So really it's for anyone who kind of wants to go from their brain of where it's at to better.
Better's good. Better is always good.
Yeah. Who doesn't want a better brain?
Who doesn't want better? Yeah. Bring it. Now, do you want to talk? You had mentioned before we started recording that there were some case studies that you were able to share. Did we already talk about those, or are there other case studies that you have hiding in your back pocket that you might be willing to share with the audience?
I have a few N=1 case studies, which obviously, that's
what we're all about here.
Yeah, that's kind of a biohacker style. So I have some, actually at the moment, a fibromyalgia trial that's going on, because that's a condition which is a body, it's mainly chronic pain at certain points, but also, there's a lot of data to suggest that there is also a personality involved in fibromyalgia. So that's an interesting study where we're going to look to see, okay, what is the effect of this kind of particular gut-brain connection? But so far, so good, but that one is maybe for when we speak next. Okay. I also have somebody with IBS who has had relief from their symptoms, which again is one of those conditions where it does seem to have a strong gut-brain component. So that's something that's ongoing. I'm collecting data, but certainly that person's self-reported scores, and I use a MYOP, which is a kind of a recognized way to collect the data, but where you report your scores on your main symptoms. So those are all going in the right direction.
Nice.
Myself, I have an Oura ring, so I'm constantly doing little things with my Oura. And I have a great platform now where I can start to pull that data in. So that is my next thing, to start to look at other metrics like heart rate variability and do studies comparing that.
Right.
And even heart rate, I have some studies going on here in England where we can't get them like the fancy tech, but they can get the kind of cheaper Fitbits. And so we're now looking at heart rate versus using red light therapy. So basically, these are just metrics of better health. And these are the results that we're getting. But like I say, this is my kind of phase now to be going into the research piece. So, in a year's time, we're going to have a lot more data. Plus, we'll have the data on people who are opting in to be in the research when they buy the system.
Is that the offer? Basically, you buy the system and you have the option to opt in on sharing your data kind of
Yes.
thing?
That's right. And so we have a brain coaching program that goes with the system, because a lot of times, people are a little bit wary of these light therapies because they don't know how to use it. And there are certain tips that people can have depending on what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the good Thrive system is that, like I say, we can actually modulate the light that's going out. So we can pulse the frequency of light depending on what we're trying to do. So some people may benefit from, 10 hertz pulsed light. Some people may benefit from 40. We're looking at meditators who seem to be able to get into meditation quicker if they use 100 hertz.
Interesting. So they'll put on their red light. They'll put on the red light and meditate while using it.
Yes, using the specific pulsing, which will be on a setting in the app. So using that, we can then record what people are actually doing it for, what setting that they used, and then we can use that data with their permission. Mm-hmm. The other thing we're doing is a brain coaching program where I said we collect people's data based on their own self-reported form. What is the thing that you're looking to deal with? How is it on a scale of 1 to 5? How's your general wellness? So we can, very quickly build up a big database to really show what's having the effect, whether it's pulsing, whether it's continuous wave, and then kind of move ourselves going forward to make sure that we're continually optimizing the output to give the best result.
I love it. Okay, so then the device, I'm going to sneeze 1 second. I'm going to save you all.
Bless you. Bless you again.
Excuse me. Thank you. My editor's going to thank me for that. Actually managed to mute myself. Okay, now, before I sneezed, I was going to ask you a question. I appear to have sneezed it right out of my head. So I have another question. Sure. Are there people who should not use red light? Is there anyone you can think of that actually what I was going to say is I was just going to circle back and say, so just to clarify for the audience, this device works with you have a band on your head, you have a band on your belly.
Yeah.
It works with an app on your phone. And not only does it have a particular output of 30 joules per second squared. Is that it?
30 joules per centimeter squared.
Per centimeter squared, sorry. But also there is an option to set it at different pulses depending on what you're trying to achieve. And I would imagine the app will give people guidance on different pulses to try based on their desired outcome.
Yeah, so the app will guide you because they're called like one might be called peace. So you kind of get an idea of where that's going to take you with that particular wavelength.
Right.
Meditate, one's called chill, one's called focus. So people can kind of use it and guide themselves. But also we encourage people to do the brain coaching program because then it's very specific. We can do a case history and we can put somebody on a protocol, see if it's working. If they've got metrics we can bring in, if people have got aura rings, that can all be brought in. So there are different ways, but yes, people can just use it based on the names of the programs. And again, this is optional. If people just want to use it just on the light mode, then that's possible too.
They can do that too. Yeah.
They can do that too. But yes, it's very interesting, the pulsing. I think, again, it's something several companies have found, certainly for things like dementia, that people tend to get stuck in this way of thinking. And that tends to be people get stuck in what they call low alpha. So maybe you can oscillate the light at a certain frequency, like 10, and it sometimes helps people to change their mental state. So it's a very interesting way that you can enhance the therapeutic effect.
Yeah, I have a panel that offers the option of picking different pulses in addition to different wavelengths. It's actually quite and I believe that 40 pulses seem to, for some people, have a better effect on pain.
Yeah, there's a lot of research. Yeah, they call that gamma frequency. Yeah, there's a lot of pain on different effects of what's going on in the body. But it does tend to be individual. And so that's why it's nice to be guided through. Mm-hmm. But of course, people who are used to self-experimentation, and if you have an awareness of what's going on in your body, you can kind of operate that way too.
100%. I love it. Okay, so what stone? Oh, so actually, yeah. So I did ask you, is there anybody who shouldn't use this modality? Is there anyone you can think of that would be contraindicated?
There are a few contraindications out there at the moment. For example, epilepsy, with the pulsing, although with this particular device, it's flush against the forehead. It's not in the eyes at all. And so, but I think there are certain caveats where people say, okay, let's just say no epilepsy. But actually, I know a lady in Australia who's doing a trial specifically for epilepsy. So
good. Okay.
See what comes of that. But there are no known side effects that have been documented, no known major side effects. As I've mentioned, it is a biphasic response. You can overdo it. Right. So, if you take a device that's a 10-minute session and you use it for a few hours, you may find that you get a bit woozy, headaches, maybe trouble sleeping, because, you'll be activating your body to the point where it can't deal with the waste and maybe produce too many reactive oxygen species, and then you may negate the effect. But mainly I don't know how many studies there are out there, about 4,000 studies on humans, that there's no documented side effects. If you compare, if you're taking an opiate or any of these other things, it's a very, very safe therapy generally.
Okay, that's great. What if, and I'm just going to ask this because, people tell me, sometimes now you ask these questions and I'm wondering the same thing as I'm listening to the podcast. What if somebody has, what about things like melanoma or precancerous growths? Because, as time goes on, it seems that there's an increase in these things. And if someone has a history of that on their forehead, is the red light, is there any information on red light and that kind of thing? I mean, there's a part of me that says, oh, there might be some benefit, but on the other hand, I don't know. So
Yeah, I think generally people say not to use where there's a known active tumor of any kind.
Of course. Yeah.
However, I think the more and more research that goes on, it seems like, again, this whole thing about homeostasis, the body isn't just accelerating cell growth anywhere. It's kind of using the energy where it should. But yes, of course, I think always err on the side of caution. And I will say straight away, I am not a medical doctor, and anyone who's doing any of this and has any concerns definitely should seek
your doctor. Yeah.
Full disclaimer, I do not claim at all to be offering medical advice, and you really do need to see a professional if you've got something like active cancer in your body.
Yeah.
But I will say that there are people who are looking, and I was recently at Durham University with the wonderful Professor Paul Chazot, and he was looking and asking the question, well, what is going on here? Is it actually accelerating cell growth everywhere, or is it accelerating cell growth in very specific pockets, in which case it changes the conversation around cancer? But at the moment, while we still don't know and there's still not enough data, it's always best to err on the side of caution.
100%.
It's always, if there's any kind of concern, people say to me, what about in pregnancy? No, I don't think there's a side effect, but of course, err on the side of caution and don't do it then. You have active, you have epilepsy. Until the data's in, it really is down to, individual responsibility and to kind of do what's best for you and make sure you've checked it out with all the people, all of your health professionals. But yeah, I think really it's a very relatively safe modality, and people are looking at these conditions that seem to be a contraindication, and who knows, maybe in 5 years' time, relatively listed as a therapy.
I mean, definitely doing a search on PubMed, guy. For those of you who like to research, you go on to PubMed and you type in near infrared or red light therapy or photobiomodulation and fill in the blank, see what's being done on the research side, speak to your medical professional. But as Sarah said, I mean, definitely especially like pregnancy's one where it's really hard, right? Because people want to be healthy during their pregnancy. They want to do all the things they can do to ensure that super baby and healthy mom. And in cases like this, it's tempting. And we have to say, we just don't have the data. So we don't really know.
Yeah, we don't have the data. You have to make your own choice. But bear in mind that these frequencies are frequencies that you find in natural sunlight. We're not giving the body something that it doesn't already recognize. So I think that's really why I love this therapy, is because it's something where you say, yeah, would you get that in nature? Yeah, you would. You'd get that at sunrise and sunset. And actually, for people who want to try out, sunrise and sunset is a great way to get red light, regardless of all. Well, all of this technology and everything that we've got going on, but we actually have free red light twice a day.
Yeah.
Everyone has access to it. Even, here I am in grey old England, although I mustn't say that we have a rare heat wave today of 30 degrees, which everybody's outside. But, even on grey old England day, at sunrise and sunset, you're still getting those long wavelengths of light.
100%.
So, yes, this technology is great. If you want to start off using it and, getting the tech is a problem, go out at sunrise, start there. Yeah. But I think the good thing about these technologies is you're not giving yourself something that the body doesn't already have access to. Right. So I think, if people are weighing up the risks, that's something to consider. It's, these are natural frequencies.
Cool. I love it. Thank you. Sarah, where can people find you? Where can they find out more? And where can they get their own device if they decide that Sarah Thrive is something that they want to get their hands on?
Yeah, no problem. Well, I can be anywhere on Sarah Thrive, which is CERA, Sarah Thrive. And I'm on all the usual socials, but any links from all the socials or any of the websites, sarahthrive.com, it all comes back to me.
Amazing.
So anyway, yeah, sarah@sarahthrive.com.
I love it. Thank you so much. It's always such a pleasure speaking with you.
Yes.
And I can't wait to see, I can't wait to do this again in a year and find out, all the amazing things that have emerged.
Yes.
After this being out in the market for a year, it'll be awesome.
It will be awesome. And I'm sure I have a lot to tell you. So yes.
Can't wait. All right. Thank you, Sarah. Have a great day and stay cool.
Good. Take care, Nat. Bye-bye.